So a very warm welcome, everybody. This is our final event of Future of London's Council-led Housing Forum, which has been a 3-year programme where we've been supporting council-led housing delivery across the capital. And I'll say a little bit about the forum, but my name is Nicola Mathers. I'm Chief Executive of Future of London. I'm going to be chairing the event today. So this morning's event wraps up this programme, but what we really want to be talking about is the future of council-led housing form. So where are we going to be in 5 years' time? And we have a great panel for you today. So in terms of our agenda then, we've got a panel of 3 speakers. We've got Nat Daniels, who is Assistant Director of Housing at the GLA. She's going to give the London-wide perspective. Then we've got Pat Hayes, who's Managing Director of Be First and a Future of London Board Director, and Jennifer Dowthong, who's day 2 into being the Executive Director of Housing Regeneration and Public Realm at Lewisham, previously Waltham Forest. And Pat and Jennifer are going to give the local authority perspective. Following our speakers, we've then got a fantastic panel of people who've been supporting the forum over the last 3 years. Joining Visika, who's been running the forum, and we're going to be inviting them to give a brief response to the presentations that they've had. We'll then obviously have the opportunity for you to ask questions as well, and I really encourage you to put your questions in the chat at any time during the presentations, and don't forget to tell us your name, your organisation, and who your question is aimed at. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So we are recording the event and we will share it on the Future of London YouTube channel. If you haven't already, if you're not showing your name and your organisation, it'd be great if you could rename yourself, and that's just by clicking the 3 dots at the top of your screen, just so that we know who's in the room. Use the chat to introduce yourself. Please keep your screen on so we can feel like we're in a room together. That would be great. And I might come to you at the end for you to actually ask your question yourself. A huge part of the programme then, saying a bit more about the programme itself, it was all about supporting the council-led housing delivery, whether that's for in-house teams, whether it's for ALMOs, whether it's for council companies, bringing in experts from across the development sector with their own expertise. And the idea is that we are providing the opportunity to not just hear from experts, but to really build up the opportunity for boroughs to talk to themselves and share their own experience and really build up that bank of knowledge across London. So since November 2018, we've had over 800 delegates through being involved in the programme, which has been amazing. Through every single London borough has been involved, plus 10 ALMOs. And we've covered a huge range of topics. So whether that's how to put together the right development team, winning resident support, net zero, procurement, end-to-end development, the end-to-end development process, fire safety. You know, we've covered everything, and it's just been such a rewarding experience. And I hope maybe some of the sponsors who've been really heavily involved in those sessions will say a bit more about that later. So during the programme, we've seen really such a huge increase in the ambition for council-led housing delivery, increase in targets for periods of up to 5 to 10 years, with expectations of homes rising to up to 1,000 a year for some of the boroughs, and maybe Nat will say a little bit more about that. We've had a substantial growth in the size of the teams. We've really seen that, and councils are really committed to growing their own talent, which is really important, and making openings for a much more diverse workforce. And then finally, what we've also seen is obviously a huge range of different approaches to how delivery is done, whether that's direct delivery, special vehicles, ALMOs, etc. But a real sort of focus on not just delivering for the current population, but future generations as well, and really thinking about the community as a whole. So that's just a little insight, and I think we'll probably hear a little bit more about that later on, about the programme itself. But I really want to come into now the actual panel presentations, and we've asked every one of our panelists, our 3 panelists, to think about one thing, which is how will council-led housing delivery develop in the next 5 years? So we've asked them to comment on what's the proportion of the market going to be, what changes are we likely to see in the structure and the products, where will we see development taking place, and really what is the USP in terms of council-led development. So our first presenter then is Nat Daniels, who's Assistant Director at the GLA, and Nat, we invite you to bring your sort of London-wide perspective of what's happening across the boroughs. Over to you, Nat.
Hello, everyone. I'm going old school and just speaking because I think it's a nice thing to do, and it's really, really nice to see all the faces here. So thank you all very much for coming and looking forward to talking to you more today. I think the first thing to acknowledge as part of this is that fundamentally, from the GLA perspective, councils are one of our key delivery partners, and we are incredibly proud of the renaissance that we might have enabled, but they've effectively put themselves through in the last few years. And I think there's been humility and growth mindset that's come along with the kind of growth that Nicola has talked about, that recognises that we need skills and experience as well as funding to be able to deliver for our communities and deliver for London. And I think the way that councils across London have really committed to that endeavour in its fullest sense, and have also committed to building a coalition through networks like this that can share skills, share experience, work with each other as peer to peer to really create a unique selling point for what councils deliver is laudable. I think it's important at this juncture for me to also just recognise Future of London here. So we worked with them to help set up this forum 3 years ago, but we think it's been absolutely fundamental to ensuring that some of that proportionality of the market that I'll talk about shortly, which is remarkable, has been achieved. So thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you to Visaka. Thank you to the whole team for really helping you guys who are on this call to enable your commitments and come together and deliver this. So thank you. And thank you for those of you who've joined in this forum to committing to learning process and the continued professional development and the continued improved standards that we all want to work towards so we can be in the best city that we possibly can be. So thank you, all of you, for that. I'd like to start by painting an overall picture of where we are from what we're seeing. And the GLA, as I say, might have been an enabler in this, but we're enabling very, very willing parties who are desperate to deliver for their communities, which we can only applaud. London boroughs are growing, you're maturing, and you are now executing delivery capacity. There has been a definitive renaissance in the last few years. The evidence that we can see of that is that since 2018, so in 3 years, councils have delivered 8,365 homes. That is a key proportion of our programme, and that is a remarkable increase and ratchet in delivery. So 3 years ago, there was a delivery rate for councils that was not quite at that scale because you had not had the funding that was commensurate to doing so. And I think by accepting that funding with that skills and experience increase, that ratchet has been really incredible. You committed as councils to deliver 10,000 by March 2022, despite there being Brexit, a global pandemic that has led to all sorts of market uncertainties and difficulties. Not only are you online to hit that, you're actually online to hit it a couple of months early, which again is incredible. For our new programme that we announced in August, the 21 to 26 programme, where we are obligated to deliver 35,000 homes for Londoners, councils will be approximately 40% of the initial allocation. That might increase over the course of the programme because there's still a percentage left for CME, but on those initial allocations of 29,000, councils are 40% of it. That's 12,024 homes, again, before including CME. That's more than half the social rent homes, and therefore more than half of the funding package is going to councils. I think it's important to recognise when you are becoming a key delivery partner that there are going to be some challenges that we're all going to have to deal with as we move forward. As a mayoral body, we've sought to have some initiatives that help with this, and I will speak to those. But I think it's also really important to recognise that there's some initiatives that we've got a limited amount of impact we can have. So the tenacity of everyone on this call to keep delivering is what's really making it work. Because whilst we do have some ideas and some processes, and we'll work with you as closely as we can, we're aware, and I speak to enough wonderful people in councils to know that You're often operating in political environments that can be changeable. You're often operating in environments where maybe a climate emergency has been declared, where maybe there's pressures on the balance sheet from all sorts of social care issues that have happened as a result of the pandemic that you really need to prioritise, deliver for your communities. You're having to think about building safety, you're having to think about stock maintenance, you're having to think about all these major issues that could divert you from new supply. And that commitment to work through those macro challenges and still be 40% of our new programme shows an absolute and sheer commitment to delivering homes for Londoners. The kind of initiatives that we've set up to help you through your challenges, again, recognise this skills and experience piece where we all want to get you to being the best you can be. So we initially, when we set up our programme to deliver with you, had a £10 million home building fund that ran from 2018 to 2021. We think that's had some successes. We're going to do some monitoring and evaluation of that now to understand what the lessons learned were, so we can keep supporting you in the most practical way possible. We also initiated public practice, which I think many of you have used to really identify key talent and make sure you capture it, keep it, and use it to deliver joyous places. We have generated the right to buy back programme, and we were really proud in the last couple of months to extend that to Afghanistan returnees, and it's actually exemplary that a London council has already taken us up on that and is delivering for that community as well. And we've also worked with you on the right to buy ring fence offer, which speaks to the challenges that you have again about managing your balance sheet and optimising your resources. Recognising those macro challenges again, I think it's really important that those macro challenges also speak to the future trends that you guys are going to be dealing with and facing. And what I'm really enjoying watching is the openness with which you're facing those trends, and the idea that I think you guys, and there's some examples that I'll speak to shortly, and I'm sure Pat and the other speakers who follow will speak to in more detail. You guys are actually paving the way to show how to face these trends with innovation, including partnerships, including demand and supply, including meeting supply issues with demand aggregation. You're doing some excellent work. I think the trends that we all need to work towards are building high quality, low carbon and well-designed homes. As you will all know, our lovely mayor has made a fabulous and really important decision to make London a global city by committing that we will be a zero carbon city by 2030. That puts a lot of pressure on you guys to follow that through. But as I said, I recognise that the boroughs who we work with, a lot of the political incumbents there resonate with that issue and that challenge and have declared a climate emergency. So we all need to work together to go there. For those ideas, we're talking about having more homes that are net zero, having sustainable green spaces. Indeed, within our New London plan, we've spoken to the idea of having at least 10 homes to be net zero on each development. Those of you who've signed up to the new programme, and I'm really proud to say that actually of those significant allocations, every council who applied did get an allocation. You've committed to the installation of sprinklers and other fire suppression systems in new blocks of flats, a ban on combustible materials, minimum floor to ceiling heights, a sunlight clause so that there will be a really good quality of light and space within the places that you're making. And you've also committed to a greater uptake of modern methods of construction. And as I say, that's one of the areas where we're really excited about the kind of innovation that you guys are bringing, not just as individual boroughs, but how you're working in partnership with others. I think it's really important in how we look forward now to say that for council-led development, I've got a plea really. And the plea is that you guys stay committed, you keep working towards the aims that we've spoken about of enacting this renaissance, building it into your business plans in the long term, making sure you all have your own identity as a borough about what you're going to deliver for your communities that recognises the incredible, wonderful and challenging diversity that you're delivering for. And I think we want to say within that plea that as we go forward, these ideas of peer-to-peer learning, these ideas of skill sharing are what will make the innovation continue and are what will make the delivery happen and happen in a high quality way. We released a report in October 2020 outlining why we think councils are in a primary and unique position to deliver for London. Running through a few of the key points because I think they will resonate with all of you. And I think one of the discussions that I'd like to see today is your ideas about how we really embed these in the culture of your delivery structures. Is that you guys have greater accountability than some of your counterparts and some of the other delivery agents that we have. You have got to represent the interests of your communities. You've got a specific democratic duty there that others don't. And we are really excited about some of the ways that you guys are already showing you can engage with the communities to make sure that that stays true throughout the course of not just the project, but the living place that you are making. I think it's also important to recognise that you've got opportunities for greater efficiencies because you can have access to public land, you can have access to different kinds of partnerships, you can talk about efficiencies across different services, recognising that some of the communities you're dealing with might have intersectional or varied needs that need to work across your counterparts within boroughs and potentially outside of boroughs as well. We recognise there's limitations there and you'll all have a unique picture, but we're really excited about the kind of efficiencies you can bring, and we think that's part of your USP and something that's going to emerge as those projects continue to come to life and you have the post-occupancy moments where you can evaluate what those lessons are. I think there's also something we believe you can do about greater additionality where you can really drive forward a scale of new supply that will work with the many, many Londoners who are still looking for decent long-term places to live and who want to make homes in your communities and really invest there. With all that in mind, I think my final and closing comments was to say thank you very, very much for engaging with each other, with this network, with the future of London, and with us on working towards the kind of new supply that we've spoken of. And I think there was a personal message from me that I recognise that I've been in post for about 6 months now, and I'm kind of probably losing the new person shine where I can knock on your door and say, please talk to me because I really want to talk to you. And I've maybe not been as efficient in doing some of those things as I would like due to various lovely pandemic constraints. But I am eager to talk to each and every one of you. And I really want the GLA to work with all of our boroughs and all of our partners in an open way where we can talk about problems and we can think of solutions together. And I want you to know that we are an enabling partner. I'm not precious, I'm really northern. You can tell me things I don't want to hear and I'd really like to hear them so I can help you out. And then we can all work together towards driving supply for London. And with that, I'll hand back to Nicola.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Nat. And it's really nice to hear the openness and the willingness with which you're happy to have conversations with the boroughs, because it is challenging, as some of the things that you've set out is, it's tough, but loads of fantastic opportunity. So thank you for that. So now I'm going to hand over to Pat, who is probably one of the most ambitious boroughs that Nat was talking about. Pat, over to you. What do you see as the future for council-led housing over the next 5 years?
Right, thanks very much, and hello everybody. Yeah, 5 years is an incredibly difficult time to talk about, I think, because as we've seen, 5 years in politics, to paraphrase Harold Wilson, is a very long time. And again, as we've seen in the UK, things can go spectacularly wrong in 5 years, and we're a country in a very different place than we were 5 years ago, and it's not for the better. On the other hand, within the development cycle, 5 years is no time at all. If you think from concept through planning, approval, procurement, build out, etc., it almost takes 5 years to get a person moving into a house or flat. So on one level, 5 years, a very, very long time. Another level, we're almost locked into what will happen over the next 5 years already, and we're in that place. I think also we're in a time of quite extreme change, and I think we're still in a position where we don't know what the effects of Brexit will be. We certainly don't know what the effects of COVID will be. And housing development by councils has been predicated in a way on this concept of a growth in the build-to-rent sector. Whether the build-to-rent sector at the moment will survive post-COVID is an interesting question, I think. You know, that depending on who you talk to, if you talk to some of the people and some of the agents, it's all doom and gloom in terms of people not being willing to pay the premium price for the units which subsidise the more affordable units, etc. People not wanting to live in central London anymore, and the knock-on effect therefore moving that out, people moving out of London. On the other hand, obviously, there is a more positive side which sees this as a blip, but there probably may well be a readjustment of values within the build-to-rent sector, which I think is significant, and we have to factor that through. We've also got a time of quite increasing land value on industrial sites as well, because again, a lot of the housing development in London was predicated around intensification of industrial and ultimately release of industrial land. We're now certainly in the eastern part of London, in a position where we've put a brownfield site on the market and offers are way north of £6 million an acre. House builders, no house builders have come forward and bid on that site because of the value, because the commercial industrial occupiers are prepared to pay a lot more and can deliver a faster, quicker return, etc. So there are investors who've been strongly backing housing development in the past who are now strongly backing industrial development, moving their money there. And I think that's a trend that we need to think about, so that in terms of where we'll be in 5 years' time, where will the build-to-rent market be, which knocks back into what councils are doing, where we'll be on the land supply market. I think personal view is this demand for industrial commercial land will top out. It's partly due to COVID, partly due to Brexit, partly due to online shopping development and various other factors, but everyone will probably reach their point of having what they need, and that price point will probably drop out. So we're not at a point where I don't think we'll see industrial land being released or developed. But those are important things, I think, to think about. The other thing to think about is that we have in the UK at the moment a very different government than we've had really since any time since universal suffrage was introduced. And you've got a quite right-wing but populist government doing unusual things effectively, pulling with the market with one hand and being prepared to spend, on the other hand, very libertarian deliveries at the other and very nationalist at the other. So that will have an effect, because what councils are doing is always dependent on what government allows them to do. And government could actually snuff out council housing development quite easily if it wanted to, essentially by an order in Parliament, in terms of the way either Public Works Loan Board works or what councils are allowed to do. And we still have a government that's very strongly committed and sees that ultimate housing solution is for people to own their own homes. And indeed, whose electoral success in the north of England is actually partly based on the fact you can buy homes cheaply, and people have done that in quite large numbers. There's quite a lot of new housing developed for sale in parts of the country which are seen as deprived, which is an interesting thing that people often forget. So I think we've got a number of trends that we've got to grapple with. I think on the positive side for local government development, I think we've probably seen the boom of the housing association sector, which was traditionally, really since 1979, it's been seen by successive governments, the housing associations will deliver affordable housing. I think we've got to the point where almost they have become so big, and we're now seeing these mega housing associations with more homes than the city of Birmingham spread all over the country. The sort of negative effect about their way they're able to manage their huge stock, but also the very high wages, for example, they pay their chief executives. And I think that has corroded the image of the housing association movement. At the same time, that because of the way they expand and develop, they are the ones who are really being hit in the bank balance by the costs of dealing with fire safety and retrofitting around fire safety. So there's a big opportunity there for local authority, and it's something we certainly feel that we have to step up into that space, because housing associations will not be able to develop in the way they were developing. And, quite unhelpful in some cases. I remember in my previous local authority, two housing associations bidding up the price of land against each other, which has got absolutely no good for the public purse, and absolutely no good in terms of increasing the supply of affordable housing. So I think there's some benefits by cooling in that part of the market, but a big obligation therefore for local authorities to step in. And I think that then comes back to the issue of capability, capacity, ambition, need. And at the moment, I've spoken at various seminars like this for district councils, and virtually every district council in the country seems to think, we must have a housing company. I'm sort of thinking, well, one, have you got the housing demand? Do you understand this isn't just a way to make money so you can keep your council tax down, which seems to be a misconception a lot of the time? And actually, how are you going to make a commercial success of a housing product in an area where, you know, the rental market is very weak, or whatever. So I think there's a bit of a fashion at the moment. That fashion will clearly, I suspect, be dented by what's happened in Croydon. Particular model went fairly spectacularly wrong. And I think a lot of councillors and Section 151 officers will be going, I'm not sure we want to go there anymore, you know. And so I think there will be a backing down of the trend, probably a concentration in activity around those boroughs that one have the opportunity to do it in terms of, you know, a supply of relatively available land or estates that you can regenerate. And again, that the estate regeneration aspect is one where, you know, again, we need continuing consent and support of government. And we've seen the impact in London in terms of the change. They said it was always the same, but the change of rules around how you can use reprovision and the grant money and how that is used for estate regeneration. Very little effect outside London, a massive effect in London in terms of potentially making the estate regeneration programme with very high buyback values very, very difficult to do. So you've got to have the ability to acquire land. You've got to have either the estates that need regenerating haven't been regenerated, and some boroughs are effectively almost maxed out. And you've got to be in a position where you are willing and able, both politically and financially, to do that. I mean, we have a very big programme. Huge percentage of London's actually for our size, but we are borrowing very, very heavily to deliver that programme. And there's a political will and commitment to do that. A lot of boroughs will say, no, we're not going there. We don't have to go there because the housing market works relatively well. In our case, the housing market doesn't work well. So we're stepping in where the house builders don't want to go. And I think that's another issue. And that comes back to this question at the end, you know, local authorities have got to see themselves as being an important player in the housing market, but we don't want to push out the private sector. They've got an important role to play. Actually, I'd love to get more private sector development in Barking. We have to intervene less, actually. So, you know, there's an important point there. Can we do this at cost? We're buying a lot of stock directly off developer contractors because actually we can't deliver supply because of we don't have a contractor of our own. We're not vertically integrated. We're quite an expensive way of delivering stock. Yes, we can deliver very high quality stock and deliver it fast, but we are beaten on price by contractor developers because we have too many tiers in our supply chain. So I think in terms of revitalising that approach longer term, in 5 years, someone else are probably looking at, you know, do we acquire a contractor? Do you actually become much more vertically integrated? Do you have your own access to an MMC supply product, possibly collectively with a number of boroughs? You know, so I think there are lots of things that we need to think about and do. And this mindset, which is an easy solution, let's all have a housing company, councils can do it all, is probably wrong. On the other hand, we do need to get back to where we were 100 years ago, effectively, where councils were stepping into the housing market where the housing market has failed, and were delivering good quality, well-designed housing supply, not just for those in greatest need, which is the greatest challenge for us, actually. It is about delivering for those people who are not served by the conventional housing market, but are not served by a residual model, which is purely based on housing needs. So I've now used up my 10 minutes, but in terms of where we are going over the next 5 years, I think we will see a basing off of council involvement in direct delivery. And I think then we will see a steady growth rather than this rapid growth that we've seen before. But, you know, again, that's very much dependent on government policy. It's very much dependent on the economy, and it's very much dependent on us all continuing to get it right and not actually being any more Croydons or anyone like that, because that will kill it for everybody. So that's my 10 minutes on the next 5 years.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Pat. And you've covered so much ground, and I hope we'll come back to some of those issues later on in the Q&A and the panel discussion. So brilliant. I'm going to now hand over to Jennifer, and I know, Jennifer, you're having slight internet issues, so if we need to switch your camera off, we will do that. But otherwise, over to you and your experience and your perception of what council-led housing delivery is going to be doing over the next 5 years.
Thanks, Nicola. Given the events of the last couple of years, it was with some great trepidation that I approached the opportunity to crystal ball gaze about the future of the housing market. But I'll give it a go. And in particular, I was interested in thinking about the contribution that councils have to make to the home building sector as a whole. And, you know, if we cast our minds back, we don't have to go that too far back, maybe 50, 60 years, where councils were delivering 200,000 homes a year, which is a very far cry from where we are at the moment. It's not just about numbers, it is also about quality. And I do think that councils are uniquely placed to do some things around around home delivery that perhaps other providers aren't, particularly when it comes to being a democratically accountable custodian of place, opportunities to integrate services that are essential to enabling our residents to flourish with housing provision. So we've heard from the GLA already, and what we've seen in the years since the May government lifted the HRA borrowing cap into 2018-2019 is an increase in starts on site by councils per year of about a third. So from about 2,000 homes per year before the cap was lifted to about 3,000 after it was lifted. And what that tells us is that despite all of the challenges that councils have had in terms of delivery, some councils have always tried to find a way to bring forward the homes that their communities need. And they've done that through a number of different initiatives, by being quite tenacious, trying to find ways round particular diktats that have been put out by government that aren't particularly helpful when it comes to council housing delivery. What I would note is that over that period to 2020, this increase has come about despite Brexit uncertainty. And I think if we cast our minds back, it seems like a long time ago, but actually there was quite a long tail in terms of market uncertainty leading up to our eventual Brexit in 2020. We've done it despite there being COVID, and actually I think the way that the construction industry and councils in particular have responded to that has been incredible, really, when you think about it. We've got some delayed completions, but by and large, very few mothballed sites, certainly in London. So I think it's reasonable to assume that council starts will remain at least level or increase. And of course, we've heard from the GLA that roughly 12,000 homes for councils to be delivered over the next 5 years, and you'd expect there to be more coming as part of continuous market engagement. And I know from my previous job that other starts that have been funded via other older programmes as well. So that all looks promising. However, given some of the challenges that we've heard about, I do think it's difficult to see a huge step change or increase in council house building delivery for a number of reasons. And some of those have been talked about before, but I'll just kind of run over the ones that I see. I think the first one is that most councils who use the initial freedom associated with the lifting of the cap are getting close to their maximum borrowing limits when it comes to the housing revenue account, not just because they've already accelerated their development programmes, but also, of course, because they are having to invest in fire safety measures. And I recognise that some of that taller building stock sits with housing associations, but it is by no means just housing associations who are having to find the money to fund that. I don't think that as a home building sector, we've solved one of the constant challenges, which is around skill shortages, which acts as a constraint on supply in absolute terms, but also manifests itself in competition between home builders, driving up labour costs. And of course, that all adds to the financial challenge. There are macroeconomic forces in the short term that are already posing supply chain challenges to the sector that will need to be overcome, be it barges that are stuck in Suez, or a decline in steel production elsewhere around the globe. And I think perhaps most importantly, if you work for a local authority, the scale and pace of development that's required in order to address housing shortages and market failure is and continues to be a concern for communities where the benefits of that development are not appropriately sold to them. And this really goes to the point of political will, around the political will to continue to deliver in the face of adversity. Of course, that aligns with political cycles. So I think you'll see that local authority home building perhaps peaks at points where we don't have elections around the corner. And of course, lots of other challenges associated with where exactly development is going to come forward next. So I think there will be a number of local authorities, and I used to work at one, where some of those easy wins in terms of land supply are disappearing, are diminishing, leaving us with the more complex sites and some of those industrial opportunities that Pat has referred to earlier. So I said it was difficult, but not impossible to see a step change in delivery, but it really does depend on councils continuing to be as tenacious and innovative as they have been throughout history when it comes to addressing some of these challenges. There are ways to establish delivery models that enable councils to get around the HRA borrowing cap. We have some really mature models, both in Ealing and in Barking and Dagenham, some slightly less mature but maturing models in other organisations that have set up local housing companies. However, there will remain a level of prudential borrowing above which Section 151 officers and local authorities won't be able to go beyond. That is a question for each local authority to think about themselves. There is private capital out there that's desperate to invest in the sector. So in thinking about delivery models that we might see coming forward, councils, if they do want to make available if some of the investment is out there, might need to be thinking about how to get more comfortable with joint venture arrangements in particular, and the sorts of arrangements that would enable us to bring forward genuinely affordable products using that private sector investment. There have been an increased number of collaborative and concerted efforts to address the skills shortage, some of those funded by the GLA in terms of its home building capacity fund, some being hosted by organisations like Future of London, and also local authorities who are willing to collaborate in order to try and bring forward and realise some of the opportunities offered by MMC. Pat referred to the North East London Buyers Club, which is an initiative that is trying to create those economies of scale to enable us to test MMC as a large-scale market for all of us. The market has a tendency to respond to supply chain challenges. And I guess the question for local authorities is where they want to be positioned in coming up with some of those solutions. So integrated supply chains, I know that other local authorities have thought about and in some cases made moves towards actually setting up or purchasing their own construction arms. And that might be something that we see council continuing to innovate amongst. And then finally, the opportunity where we are engaging with communities appropriately, communicating with them and bringing forward genuinely high quality development to bring those communities along with us and to maintain political will to continue to bring forward sometimes difficult, tricky, long-term, large-scale, complex sites, which is what we will need to get around to deliver at the scale that we need. And I think that's my 10 minutes up, Nicola.
Thank you so much, Jenna, and thank to all of our panelists for being absolutely spot on with their timing. Such a massive array of issues, you know, from that real sort of confidence and acknowledgement of the work that everyone's being done, and Pat and Jennifer talking about all the challenges which are obviously significant and that have been discussed at length with Brexit and supply chains and skills and capacity, but also some real opportunity as well. So we've got a fantastic panel now that's going to join us, who are Visca, who's been running the programme for the last 3 years. We've got our fantastic sponsors who not only provide financial support for the programme, but have been really involved in all of the events that we've been running, providing advice and support and help for our panellists. But I'm going to start off with Janice Morfitt, who's a professor at the Bartlett School of Planning UCL and has just published last month, I think it was, wasn't it, your third report on council-led housing delivery across the country. So Janice, 3 minutes on your response to what you've heard, and it'd be really interesting to see how you see London obviously compare with the rest of the country.
Right, thanks Nicola, and thanks everyone. It's very difficult in 3 minutes to tell you everything that we found, so there's much in the report, but thank you for everybody in London for participating, and for Danny Kay and Danny Sutcliffe also for their support in the work that we've been doing. Well, first of all, London has always been in the lead in terms of its level of activity, and that remains the case. And you may think that you know, that you've got many pressures, but you are still in the lead. and you're delivering more than the rest of the country because of your different arrangements, financial support through the mayor and through this programme that we're talking about today and wrapping up. And now in 2021, all London boroughs are delivering in some way or other. And I think, you know, our other speakers have talked about innovation in methods. And I think if you see our work, you see that councils across the country are using many different ways of delivering. And I think in London also you've been able to provide more affordable housing because of the mayor's support for that. So I'm not saying, you know, lots of other people outside London would wish they had your arrangements. So we're pressing government to allow that to be extended. Where are we going in 2021? What did we find? Well, 82% of councils do have companies, and that compares with 57% in 2017. But that includes things like management, maintenance, development, construction, and so on. So lots of different types of company. 80% of councils now have joint ventures, often for specific schemes, and that compares with 57% in 2019. So lots of councils to talk to if you're thinking of going down that line. I think Pat mentioned the fact that lots of councils were looking at providing housing to generate income. Well, we found a shift. 2017, yes. 2021, big focus now from councils providing affordable housing through their housing efforts. That's the main focus. And we found that 80% of councils across the country have the provision of affordable housing in their corporate plans as a priority, which I think is a big change. In terms of a couple of new things that we found this time, lots of new things, but just to pick out a couple which I think are about the future. We found that a huge number of councils are working with others in terms of the role of housing in regeneration. And this is largely unaccounted for. We found 207 councils in England were working with partners in regeneration schemes in terms of housing replacing retail and offices, commercial, as a kind of anchor for development, and that includes social and affordable housing. So the view seems to be that that rent roll is a kind of good basis for development and a steady income. We think that needs to be more recognised. It's not in housing strategies, planning strategies or corporate strategies. It's not recognised by the market, and of course all the homes developed through that mechanism by and large will be accountable to, will be attributed to the private sector, whereas councils are taking risk, they're using advocacy, putting money, putting land in. So we need a bit more on that, I think. The other thing we found this year, I'm just picking out a few points, but lots of councils have found it very difficult to procure net zero and MMC in one hit. And they've changed suppliers, they've changed, you know, the way they're procuring and blah, blah, blah. It's still been very difficult to achieve. However, when you do manage to implement net zero, leaving aside the MMC point, we are beginning to see that some councils are showing that when they've been doing it for a while, then they have actually had fewer arrears. They've had, because obviously pressures on household incomes are going down from energy costs and so on, they've had a reduction in domestic violence in those properties. And also they've had a reduction in their own maintenance costs. So although net zero may cost a bit more to start with, although some councils are getting those costs down now to nearer a more traditional method, there seem to be these other social impacts that are also worth considering. And there's a link to a report in our report if you want more information on that. So the future, if I can just, a couple of points. So I think councils will actually be delivering a high percentage of housing. And I fully take the point that Pat makes about the government can switch it off. On the other hand, all the discussions we've had with government suggest they're going in the other direction and want to see a greater delivery from councils. I think councils therefore will increase their capacity. And in more detail, we've seen in the pandemic an increasing of housing targets. We've seen no letting up in terms of what councils want to do. We've seen an increased focus on internal space and internal quality, which is perhaps not surprising in the pandemic. And so as part of retrofitting, I think there'll be a concern about internal spaces as well, wrapped up in that. And also the other thing we found is in terms of affordable housing partners, then a much earlier identification of those partners in the pre-application process in planning. So that rather than the partner being identified by a developer at the end, increasingly councils are saying when you come in for your pre-app developer, you must bring with you your ultimate owner for those affordable homes, so they can be involved in design, service, think about service costs and maintenance right at the outset. This is not a residual, this is a key part of the development. So we found that. So I think that I'll finish there, but I hope that's given a flavour, and there's much more, councils building student housing, all sorts of things in the report, developing their municipal campuses, like Waltham Forest and Hammersmith and Fulham, lots more in the report. But I hope that's kind of been a reflection on what's been said, and also given a sort of bit of a flavour of other things that we've found for the future. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you so much, Janice, and hopefully there'll be time for Q&A and we can delve into some of that. I'm really interested in the decrease in domestic violence, really interesting for Net Zero Homes. Anyway, so let's go to Neil Campbell. He's a partner at BPTW. Neil, Janice mentioned the design aspects of new housing. You're responsible as an architect's practice for designing a lot of the new local authority housing. So what's your perception on where we're going in the next 5 years?
Thank you, Nicola. And really interesting series of discussions so far. I think just reflecting on this and listening to the speakers just in this morning so far, as I was just considering what we're doing now, and then moving forward 5 years. And as Pat said, it sometimes takes a whole cycle of development before, and 5 years is upon us. So I guess where I'm going with that was that we will know really in terms of what we're doing now, how it's been delivered and how effective it's been. And that is quite an interesting point, because when we're considering, there's no doubt that local authorities are at the top end of innovation, and the paving the way was another note there by Nat in terms of what the council house building is doing. Those are the things that we're doing now, but they are innovative, and some of them are new, and they're new to all of us, not just local authorities. And I think in plus 5 years we'll really understand what it all means, because we will have the opportunity to talk to the people that actually live there, see the buildings, in use, and that will be a really important factor to bring back into the cycle, because it's never going to finish. Then we'll be talking about the next 5 years and the next 5 years, and that's what really interests me as an architect, is we need to learn from all this stuff. And in particular, I think, is moving towards net zero carbon, because that's what the council are leading the way and paving the way about. And that is a really difficult, balance to be struck, and we're doing that now with every local authority. But what's really very different in respect from local authorities and other types of house builder is that they are leading the way, because that isn't the brief we're getting elsewhere. And so again, I think it's back to this point about learning from all that, and we bring that experience in, and I think that experience will then find its way into other types of building, but we'll be learning it from local authorities. So that's a really, that's a very innovative and ambitious process. The other thing I just wanted to touch on, two other quick points, is the efficiency of the process. I suppose one of the things on the architectural and design end is that we find that working with our local authority clients, often all of the processes are different. And we've talked through this program in quite a lot of detail, I think, about how everyone's doing it in different ways, and how this forum, in fact, is a mechanism from learning from each other. But I would really hope that in 5 years' time there's some streamlining around that, because efficiencies gained in the process will be beneficial to everyone. And maybe that will mean that we'll see a sort of time where councils are working together, so it's not so singular, or there are certainly programs that are kind of connected in some way. I mean, it is the whole of London after all, not just individual councils delivering, and that is the ambition, as so well put by Natalie at the beginning. And then my final point was about quality. So I think, and this is where I feel most excited, I suppose, and in terms of how we're involved with this, because local authorities have the hardest job, as we've kind of noted. There's so many competing aspects to the brief. Everything is needed to be at the very top of the list, the highest priority: zero carbon, space standards, sustainable, making sure that we're building sustainable communities, just the highest possible quality housing. And I really hope that in 5 years' time that we see that in reality, and that we will see the highest quality housing being delivered by local authorities. I think that will be the case, and other developers, across different fields will look and see it as the innovation and as paving the way, and that really encourages me. And I think that was the great thing about this forum and the way that we've been involved, because it's been the opportunity for all of that to come together in across the board. So I'm really encouraged by that, and I hope that in 5 years' time we'll be saying exactly that. I'd say we'll be looking at things that have been delivered and being very proud of it.
Great, thank you so much, Neil. That's a lovely way to end that. I'm going to hand over to Nicola Tilbury, who's director at Potter Raper, who are employees agents who been supporting councils across the country to do council-led housing delivery. Nicola was in on the forum right from the beginning. So Nicola, your response to the presentations that you've heard in terms of what you see happening over the next 5 years.
Well, I think what we're seeing exactly echoes everything all the panelists have been speaking about. I think local authorities really upping their game in terms of delivery, in terms of quality, in terms of innovation around the net zero stuff. And I think the interest in this programme is really demonstrating how that the local authorities are wanting to really improve their delivery of council-led housing, which is one of the reasons I know, Nicola, we spoke about, which is why I got involved with it, so that our clients, we were finding we were doing lots of local housing association work, working with local authorities who just didn't really get it. So wanting to be involved with this forum to do that. It's echoed by the cohorts, I think, going through the leaders programme as well. Lots of those guys are delivery focused on housing. That's really improving things. And I think that, yeah, we're seeing, I think as somebody had mentioned, looking at JVs, I think councils are getting much more involved and excited about the possibilities of different delivery models. They're starting to really embrace that now, rather than being scared of it and trying to hold back. So yeah, we're seeing a lot more JVs, not just with, some of them are council to council, some of them are council with housing associations, some of them are with developers as well. So that's quite encouraging, even looking at different procurement models through OJU, not just necessarily thinking about it in one way. So I think everybody's just really opening their eyes to the opportunities that are out there in the way of delivering things. I think one of the other things I think that has probably caught councils out is that it's not just the delivery teams who need to upskill, it's the back of house teams that need to upskill as well. So it's all very well and good suddenly going from a really small deliveries pipeline to suddenly delivering hundreds of houses, because your housing teams need to know how to cope with that sudden influx of properties that they're not used to doing. Now, we have seen a very steep learning curve in that respect, and again a growing maturity about how some of those internal processes needs to be looked at, because they've never really had to do it before. So that's grown over the time that we've been involved, and I can see that continuing to grow. I think closing the gap was one of my big takeaways from this, that we are, as Pat said, our workload used to be lots of housing associations. That is now being replaced by councils. They've got different focuses. So we're looking at refurbishment, taking off cladding, doing fire risk work. So I think, yeah, closing the gap and scaling up from our local authority clients is definitely happening. And I think Future of London and local authorities within London are being looked at by those outside of London who are really keen to see what's happening. And I think, as Janice said, yeah, you're leading the way in London, but you are being watched and people are replicating that. And people are very jealous when I speak about the future of London and what's happening and the pan-London cooperation and collaboration that's happening. Outside of London, they're really quite jealous of that, because they would like to develop, but they're not sure how. And of course, that's kind of starting to increase now because of the COVID and the moving out from London. That demand is growing as well. So yeah, I think, yeah, my takeaway really is closing the gap. Keep on going. Oh, Nicola, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Nicola. That's brilliant, and really interesting also to hear your perspective of what out of London thinks of what's happening in London. Over to Danny. So Danny's a partner at Redloft, again, being a long-term supporter of the forum, very, very involved in the sessions. Danny, tell us your perspective, your take on what you've heard from the first three speakers and where you see council-led housing going.
Yep, absolutely brilliant. The first three speakers, I think they encompassed everything that I would have said about what I think the future is for London. I think Pat's points and Janice's points about partnerships and about being part of the solution where the private sector doesn't want to go are incredibly important. I've always thought that the council should be stepping in where the private sector doesn't go and get the market back, and I think that's fantastic. And we're seeing councils increasingly doing that. And I think that's really, really positive. And I think that will grow, and those partnerships will grow, and that enabling element that the councils will grow. And I think the reason they'll grow is the success that local authorities are having now in building new homes. You know, that old cliche about success having many fathers is really very, very true. And I think what that will do, that will embolden members who will have more confidence in the teams and allow more innovation, because it's been a struggle so far. Members have been very reluctant. Development is very complex, but there seems to be a view that developing is really easy and straightforward, and therefore the bumps in the road which local authorities have faced while developing, which are normal development risks, have been seen as abnormal by members, and that's made it difficult for officers to deliver. And I think that will dissipate and members will have more confidence, and that will make it much easier for officers to deliver, because also members will understand more the risks and the problems that they're facing and the issues that have to be overcome. You know, not every scheme works, not every scheme is a triumph, and you have to accept that and take a program approach. So I think that maturity and the understanding will really help officers deliver. I think central London as a market will return, and that will be very interesting for the central London local authorities, because at the moment it is quite dead. But I think there's a tsunami of cash out there waiting to come into London, and that will raise prices. We've seen quite a buoyant market in zones 3 outwards, but not so much in 1 and 2. And I think that will change, and kind of post-pandemic, I think we'll see cash coming in, and that will re-energize those markets. I think the RPs will return. I think there's a 5-year cycle now where they will be doing lots of fire safety, and after that they will be coming back, and so there'll be that additional demand going for sites. So I think there's a window now for 5 years for local authorities to fill a gap, but I think after the cycle of it might be longer than 5 years, but I think the bulk of it will be done in the next 5 years in terms of fire safety. So I think there's a real window now for local authorities to fill that gap. I do agree with the panelists' points about the skills and the shortages. I don't think it's going to be the kind of growth that some of the central government wants to see, because I think there is a break on resources. There just aren't the people, there aren't the skills. We don't have enough labourers, we don't have enough plumbers, we don't have enough bricklayers, and we don't have enough professionals either, and we don't have enough development capacity. So that will need to grow over the next 5 years. What I would like to see as well is the Pat's point about MNC factories. I think this is an area that local authorities really could lead on, and we're seeing some RPs taking that on now. Particularly Swan have got a factory and are opening another one. And I think this is an area that I hope that local authorities will move into and look at, because I think it's a real way forward in delivering that MNC and net zero programs that we all must have going forward. So I'm hopeful of that. And the last point I wanted to make was the cross-subsidy model. We're now seeing, I think Janice's report, there was a massive increase in people using the cross-subsidy model. And we're seeing that increasingly, the local authorities are now looking to get private sale to cross-subsidise the delivery of affordable, which is very much the housing association RP model. And that takes time to work through, because you're then taking sales risk as well, and the understanding of that. And I think over the next 5 years, local authorities will get a much better understanding of the pressures of delivering a private sales led schemes, and that expertise will grow in that as well. So those are the key takeaways I've got for the next 5 years.
Great, thank you very much, Danny. Fantastic. Final word comes to Visika. Visika's been running the programme for the past 3 years. So I invite you, Visika, to give your reflections. And obviously going last makes it really tough because hopefully everything's been said. We've covered so much already.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. I want to thank everybody for coming today for our last session. Actually, I want to start with that, and of course for all the support we've had from the GLA and from our sponsors as well, so from Redloff, BPTW and Potter Aper, because we have come together and you know, this is something that needs to happen not just in London. Obviously it does need to happen elsewhere, but we are ahead of the curve, and I think it's just a reflection of appetite. There was a real appetite in the people who've come to the forum, people who are here today. There's a real appetite to really tackle what is complex. Development is complex. Every site is individual. Every site is throwing up new challenges. And so, you know, there is a huge amount of learning to do, but by coming together, I think London boroughs are really helping each other. They are developing an expertise, and it's developing that track record, that knowledge, building that in will help with efficiency, because I think we are, as Danny has just said, we are really challenged by resources. I'm sure I don't need to say that to this audience. We've got a really big audience of local authority people with us today, and you know day in, day out how challenging resource is. But we need to make the best of what we've got, and I think that's what we're doing. We're doing as best we can, and we can keep doing that by sharing, by the peer-to-peer learning that we've been bringing together through the Future of London Council-led Housing Forum. So I encourage everybody to really look forward to doing some more of that. This might be the end of this programme, but Future of London does lots of other activities, and we're hoping to do more.
Great, thank you very much, Visika. So anyone in the audience, you're very welcome to ask questions of the panel. We've got a fantastic panel here this morning, and we've got about another 20 minutes or so for that. So, but my first question, and Mark Bajan has raised it, and I think it's a really important issue, is about MMC, because what we've heard, I guess, from a lot of people already is about local authorities really setting the standard and setting a very high bar for quality, but also being those at the forefront of wanting to achieve their net zero targets, having made commitments to the climate change pledges. So I'd be really interested, and maybe I'll start with you, Pat, on how do we make MMC more successful? How do we get it taken up by local authorities? What are the challenges? I mean, I'm having chaired a few events about it. There's still a lack of confidence in MMC, how you can apply it to, it's only for really big sites. It doesn't work in London. So interested to, and I'll ask Pat to begin with, and then maybe others can come in on that as well. And if you're in the audience and you want to kind of be part of the conversation, then do flag that up in the chat and I'll come to you as well. But over to you, Pat, first of all.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because I think a lot of, frankly, nonsense is talked about MMC on both sides of the argument, both for and against, actually. And a bit like Real Ale, I think, because some of its greatest advocates are actually its worst advert. But I think that where you've got to be is you've got to separate what is a modern method of construction effectively off-site from modular and some of the other kit that goes with it. And I think there's a lot of misconception from people that MMC is modular, and MMC is not modular. I mean, we are doing an awful lot of what you would call MMC, whether it's off-site manufactured concrete frames, whether it's wall panels, bathroom pods, meter cabinets, all that really expensive stuff that goes into big and small schemes is done off-site. And the reason we're doing that is because we're looking to develop a standardized product that is easy to build, quick to build, and is then easy to maintain and look after. And we also, there are real benefits in quality control, speed of doing stuff off-site rather than on-site. And if you look at the construction industry still, hasn't really changed very much from 1921. The machines are slightly better, they're diesel and electric powered rather than steam powered, but it's still blokes, and it's nearly always blokes with shovels in mud, digging holes and digging things, you know. And we want to move to a position where far more stuff is manufactured off-site and brought in. You know, and we're developing a framework at the moment, which will replace our existing framework. So we have a framework of MMC providers who can supply to our specification. I think that's the important thing, is to our specification, rather than at the moment, all too often, actually, what you can have is driven by the, and I spend a lot of my time in the bike industry. It's the same in the bike industry, where you can have what you're given rather than, and what the manufacturers want to produce, rather than what you as a client want. And I think we're still in that place all too often. People say, we must have MMC, which means buying a particular off-the-shelf, generally modular product. And I think there's also a lot of, you know, again, some of it's nonsense talked about the need for aggregation. Oh, this won't work without aggregation. Yet you need big contracts, and you need to be able to guarantee, and to get full price advantage, you definitely at the moment in the industry need to have a volume and a guaranteed throughput. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to aggregate with other people if you're big enough in yourself. And the other may help, maybe part of the question, but it's not the magic bullet. You know, we're doing this, you know, North London Purchasing Club because it makes sense for us, because it means that we can spread some of the risk effectively, because I don't want to be contracting with a single supplier for all my bathroom pots, for example, because they might go bust, the chairman might go mad, etc., etc. You know, on the other hand, it's quite good to be able to spread that risk with others. So you can say, well, there's a contract here for 300, but it's spread across us, you know, and other boroughs. So there is some real advantage in aggregation, but it's not the be all and end all. At the moment, there are occasions where, panelised or modular systems are more expensive than conventional construction. The real challenge here is actually working both in the way you procure, but also to change the mindset of the major construction contractors, who, because it works for them, are used to not doing things off-site. And for two main reasons for that, and public procurement is part of this, in that the historic public procurement to drive the price down low at first instance often means that contractors bid at margins which are far too low. They then recover the margin through either squeezing the client or through squeezing the supply chain and the subcontractor later on. With off-site manufacture, it's much harder, because you've signed up and agreed a spec in terms of the client, well, you'll deliver these units like this and these panels like this. And there's also a much more simplified supply chain where you're dealing with an entity producing the parts for you, rather than with lots of little subcontractors and self-employed people and things like that. So that's I think the real challenge in the system around MMC, which is not to say we shouldn't be doing agglomeration, joint procurement, all very, very good, but it's much more complex than people think. And there's a lot more MMC site being used than people immediately think. If you look at our scheme in Barking Crown House, you wouldn't say that's an MMC scheme at all, but in fact, virtually all built off-site. It's assembled on site. It's not a modular scheme by any stretch of imagination, but that's locally produced concrete frame, and then panels and everything else brought in from outside. And that's where we want. And I think that's the real benefit, is to get to that point where you do have a standard, very uniform, utilitarian, good quality product which you can erect quickly and fast. And everyone knows, that is a Barking Dagenham flat, and this is what I need to do to be able to provide this. And anyone buying or renting one knows this is what I'm going to get. And more importantly, anyone servicing it knows I walk in the door and the meter cabinet's always on the right-hand side, and it's this. So there you go. It's a very long answer to a very simple question, but it's a very complex subject.
It is, yes. Thank you very much. But anyone else on the panel or in the audience want to come back on that, add to that? It's like, how can we make it become? How can we build, I guess, people's confidence in it?
Just have a brief
Neil,
from a kind of, well, from my perspective as an architect, I think where we often see it as part of a brief, and then in sort of 3 months in, it kind of peters out for one reason or another. And I suppose I'd say it's important that an early decision is taken on whatever form of MMC we're talking about, and then you just stick by it. Because if we know that, say, we're going to utilise a bathroom pod, or we're going to utilise even a whole volumetric system, then it can be designed to that. What can't happen is you do that halfway through the process, because you have to start again. And I think this is part of what happens as briefs get, formed and discussed, and things, other priorities bubble to the top. I think you have to have conviction in it and think we are going to do this, and therefore it can completely be done. But I do agree with Pat in relation to the procurement hurdles. I think part of the issue we find is then, there is a conception that it's necessary to have a manufacturer, and particularly at a kind of volumetric scale, that is right in at the beginning, and that really upsets the usual procurement methodology of the process. And so it goes back to the point really of, if you're going to do it, then decide at the beginning, because all of those things can happen, but they can't happen halfway through.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to pitch into the selling? Yeah, Danny, and then Jennifer.
I think also we have an issue about how we model, how we financially model. One of the problems we have is that MMC can and should produce a higher quality product with lower maintenance costs, but there's no way of factoring that into most financial models. So there's no upside to the fact that it's going to be cheaper to look after that home and maintain that home over the long term. Also, there's no factoring in the cost of it being a more efficient home either, because the end user takes that benefit. And so we're not factoring that into our viabilities, because there's no benefit to the council who are delivering that, but there is a benefit to the end user. So we need to look at how we're modelling and be more creative in that, in terms of recognising the long-term costs are going to be lower, but also the greater benefits. I heard a great phrase the other day, which is the social wants of a development. And I think we don't monetize those social wants. We don't monetize the benefits that doing all the great things that we're doing comes into that equation, and that needs to be looked at. We need to be saying there is a price for having lower in-use costs. There is a price for net zero. There is a price for this, and we need to be able to pay that, to compare it for a like-for-like basis with a brick traditional home, which is procured through the process that Pat described, which we've all seen, and is unfortunately part of a kind of broken process that we have within construction, which in part has been led by a race to the bottom and a design and build concept which hasn't been properly monitored and managed for a very long time. So I think we need to look at that.
Okay, thank you very much, Danny. Jennifer, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it was just to say that people have been talking about MMC and its potential for a really long time, but it remains a relatively immature market. And actually, I take the point that Pat made about the fact that if you're big enough and you've got a big enough supply chain, the aggregation of demand isn't important. But actually, I do think having more people knocking at the door of those manufacturers at the same time at the minute will help mainstream and diversify the ways in which some of those manufacturers go about their business at the minute. And certainly when I was at Waltham Forest, one of the reasons that we were attracted to the Buyers Club was because a lot of people who manage and maintain stock don't really understand MMC, don't really understand what the implications are. And it is a really effective way, working in that collaborative fashion, to actually accelerate that learning for partners who are perhaps not quite where Barking and Dagenham are when it comes to MMC. So I was very, very, very pleased when the GLA decided to support that in my former role, and I will look on with interest to see how that Buyers Club continues to develop.
Thank you. Nicola, your response, and then I'm going to go to one of the questions in the Q&A.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think that, again, over the next 5 years, I can see councils actually embracing MMC much more because of the drive for the net zero carbon. Net zero carbon is going to be achieved by robust details, fabric first approach to reduce the need for heating. That is going to be so much easier at design stage to do by looking at some of the MMC panels and some of the equipment you can get much earlier on in the system, rather than waiting for workmanship issues on site with traditional skills. So I can see this kind of gathering a bit more pace now that the net zero carbon targets are in place.
And also the huge unemployment and skills crisis. It's just an amazing opportunity, isn't it, to train up a new generation of people, with a forward-thinking future approach to building. So
yeah, definitely. And young people don't like getting cold. It's noticed that when you're trying to get apprentices, they don't like being out on site. They don't like being in the cold. So it's a bigger sell.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So given, the whole sort of conversation is around the future and where this is going, I'm going to invite Danny Kay to ask his question. Danny, if you want to come off mute.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much. Brilliant stuff. Obviously linked to what we've just been discussing and the ever increasing complexity of properly integrated multidisciplinary design. But so to what extent does the panel see the potential of new IT, computing and 3D technologies to support this ever increasing complexity of properly integrated multidisciplinary design, including the many different layers of environmental science considerations?
Who on the panel would like to answer that? Maybe Neil?
Sure. I mean, I guess it's the first thing to say, it's already happening. So, but I don't think it's already happening everywhere. So we recognise that this is absolutely essential to how we're going to deliver housing in the future. And more people are joining us in that respect. And I think it's quite unusual now to see particularly a complex project where it's not developed through a 3D collaborative process, but it does stall because it's all very well the design team doing it and communicating and sharing models, and that is certainly an efficient process, but the real benefits should be passed on to our clients and you guys as as end users, and because the models should and could be used in the future for property maintenance, for measuring what we're what we think the design concept is in terms of performance, etc., into the reality. So I think we're on the cusp of doing that, but we're nowhere near that really. But I think in terms of the kind of process of design and integration, that is building momentum already.
That's good to hear. Jennifer, then Nicola, then Pat.
Well, I was going to say that actually it's fairly well understood that there are lots of benefits when it comes to the design process. When I worked at the Olympics, one of the first projects that I worked on, we used 3D CAD and BIM models for the design of a really, really super energy efficient cafe. What we then found was that nobody who tended to actually maintain that cafe had the ability to open any of those models. So that's the bit that's missing for me at the minute. It's pushing that knowledge and that expertise through the kind of development cycle, through the REBA stages, so that all of the heartache that we've had over fire safety, the potential for BIM models and being able to tag items, their provenance, tag the fire information to it. I think that will drive real value for asset management and maintenance. And it's another symptom, isn't it, of this kind of chopping up of the supply chain when it comes to housing delivery, management and maintenance.
Thanks, Jennifer. Nicola?
I was going to say exactly that. Good old building safety bill and that golden thread of information and the enormous potential that the BIM model has. But even when BIM came in and the government targets, it was all really predicated on clients wanting to use it and to drive it. And it is that in-use end that's really going to push those BIM levels to go up in their levels. At the moment, on many of our sites, we are talking about that golden thread and the fire stopping records and what happens to them. And there's lots of software that's being used to record them. So things like SnagR is one that we're using quite a lot, and so they are all geotagged. But as soon as you get to O&M stage, they either got to sign up to that piece of software, it's not linked to the model, or even worse, it just gets put into some huge big PDF and we're back into the dark ages and trying to actually find anything. What you need is to go into that model, geotag everything in the model and see what you've got. And that then goes to the whole O&M manual, should all be within that. So I can see the fire safety bill, the building safety bill really pushing a lot of this moving forward. And some of our contractors don't have the answer. So I've been on a few big sites with a few big contractors, and they all sit there looking at me going, oh, I don't know how that's going to work. But that conversation's happening a lot. And I think you'll see some really quite quick developments in that.
Okay, thank you. Pat?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an area actually where local authorities can really drive and change the market. And we're using BIM for everything now. But it's interesting. We were looking at buying some units off a quite a major house builder and asked them where are your BIM drawings, and they've done it all. It's all done manually. It's like, oh,
what?
Do it all in the drawing office. Oh, right, okay, fair enough. Just like going back to when I started, which is when the Romans were in charge. So you've got. So this is an area, I think, where we as clients can be really clear. We expect everything to be done in BIM. We expect everybody in the supply chain to be able to deal with BIM. And we, again, this comes back to Danny's very good point about, how we appraise and evaluate cost in use and life cycle costs, which we still as local authorities really poor at, actually, because the old traditional council housing model of doing this is way out of date against building nowadays and requirements of modern people and tenants and everything like that. So, I think it's, we can be the real leaders on this, and it does require more investment from the council side, though, because I think we've got to build across, people who want to do in-house development. You've got to build design and architecture expertise. If you're going to be an effective quality custodian, an effective client of your own architects that you bring in, and effectively drive this technological change within the industry, you've got to have in-house capacity there. So we've built a design team, which will continue probably to grow that design team, because again, as Danny said, one of the evils that we're all dealing with is the design and build contract, and it's really important that we don't just drift into councils doing all this stuff through design and build because it's easy in procurement terms, and just let contractors get on with it with architect X, who just produces what they always like and they know her or him, etc., etc. So I think this is one of those things I think we should really get involved in. Say, look, we expect this to be done to this standard for these reasons, and we want to drive that technological advance as clients.
And I guess being able to kind of share your experiences of how that's working out is really important, is it? Because if you're going to be, as what we found in the forum, if you're going to be at the forefront of something, you're going to be pioneering, you're going to be giving things a go. That opportunity to be able to share how that's going and what's worked and what systems you've used, etc., is really, really important. Nat, I know you have to leave, so I just wanted to give you the opportunity before I go back into the next question, if there's any sort of final points you need to, you just wanted to share before you have to head off.
Yeah, thank you. And Pat, I was just saying to Nicole, who said, do you want to say something? I was saying, well, I don't want to interrupt Pat. I've seen you on panels before and he just goes and it's great and I want him to talk. So I hope I'm not interrupting you or anyone else's flow, but just to say thank you. Yeah, thank you very much again for hosting this forum. And I'm learning a huge amount from this discussion about what those real challenges are. And as I say, we really want to be an enabler in this. I'm really glad to hear that from that regional outlook that you're also bringing to this, that we are in a place where we're working together to make a positive operating environment that's an exemplar to the rest of the country. And I really want that to continue. So please do keep using these forums, keep talking to us. Let's keep being honest and transparent about what these really big, really hard, really knotty issues are. And as Pat and others have just alluded to, in some of these issues, the detail is key, and we really need to be comfortable getting into that knottiness with each other. So yeah, thank you very much for hosting it. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to continuing these conversations with all of you as we move forward.
Brilliant, thank you. I just had one final question really, because it keeps coming up, which is about the role of JVs and councils working in new ways. Because I think we're seeing the increase of that, and people talking about JVs, council to council, council to housing association, council to private developer. And I just wanted the panel's reflections on where they see the future of this going, and what makes a good JV, and where you think it's going. And is that going to change over the next 5 years? Are we just going to see more? Are we going to see different types of JV? Thoughts from the panel and obviously the audience as well.
Should I say something, Nicola?
Yeah, go for it, Janice.
But if you look in our desk survey, which is on the link that I've sent, basically you can see all the JVs that we were able to find across England. I know in London people think that London's very specific, but it is useful perhaps to look at other places. Oxford, for example, has got a range of JVs. And I think what we're seeing is that in the past there was sort of a general JV between a partner and a council, and then a sort of perhaps then to define some sites. Now we're seeing different JVs on different sites for different outcomes, and I think that's the model. that we're going to see. So if you look in that desk survey, it gives you the names of the JV companies, it gives you a web link to actually what they're doing, and probably it will give you the number of dwellings that they're delivering in that line. So there's quite a lot of information if you just want to have a quick look and talk to people. I think also the other point to say is the Treasury is very keen on JVs. So again, if we have those concerns about the government kind of wanting, which I don't see, but if we have those concerns, then actually the JV model is one that the Treasury is supportive of. So if you want to spread your risk about going in just having one type of housing delivery, having some JV in your mix and getting a bit of experience of that, even with something small to start with, might be a good way of if you like, sharing that risk across different types of housing delivery from the outset. So you can always go in that direction if that's really what's pushed by government. You're not left standing if they change their views. So
thank you. So going to go to Danny and then to Pat.
I think you're going to see much more complex JVs as we go forward. I think, as I was saying earlier, I think the expertise and appetite of local authorities will grow. I think the success that we're seeing now will breed that enthusiasm. And so you're going to see in the same way that housing associations develop much more complex JVs. I think you're going to see local authorities doing that, and much more complex JVs with the private sector, where the enabling function that Pat was talking about earlier can be properly harnessed and also properly valued. So that value that the local authority brings can be properly recognised within the JV with the private sector, who will then be bringing their expertise in maybe construction or private sales. So I think there's going to be a much more evening of the JVs. I think both sides will be learning from each other. I think local authorities have got a lot to learn from the private sector, but equally, I think the private sector has a lot to learn from local authorities and their enabling and their ability to create markets and take those risks for greater social gain.
Brilliant, thanks, Danny. Pat, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another of those areas where it's a good thing to potentially spread risk. It's a good thing, we've looked very closely at whether we, rather than borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board, whether we borrow effectively from pension funds and people like that. But again, I think you've got to be a strong and robust client to know what you want, because I think too many local authorities have gone into sale and leaseback deals, which is just an expensive way of buying money, actually. Others are in quite complex arrangements, which will prove difficult 20, 25 years down the line when everything's paid off and the units come back, etc., etc. There are also some very complex JVs, which generate a lot of wealth for lawyers and accountants setting them up, but then never work in practice. So I think it is about saying, what do you want? If you want to spread your borrowing risk, then structure yourself in this way and do it that way. If you want, for example, just do a land share and a profit share, that's absolutely fine. But again, go into that with your eyes open, knowing exactly what you want out of that partnership. And JVs can't cover, it's like MMC, cover a multitude of sins. And everyone says, let's do a JV, it's some magic bullet. It's not necessarily a magic bullet at all. You have to be, and this is where it will go wrong for local authorities. People just rush in and say, they'd love to, so and so, we're offering to JV and it's cheap money, etc., etc. So it's about going into this with eyes firmly open and linking it to your other objectives in terms of, why are we doing this? How does this link to our other objectives? How does it link to what we're doing? Because again, this is one of the areas that worries me. I think it's one of those areas where it could go badly wrong again.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Any last thoughts? Aware of the time, we've got to 10:30. Okay, I'm going to draw it to a close. Thank you so much to the panelists, to the speakers. We've covered so much ground. It's been absolutely fascinating. I hope everyone in the audience has really enjoyed it. I want to say a huge thank you, obviously, to our sponsors who have been able to support the programme over the last 3 years. So the GLA, Potter Raper, Redloft and BPTW, as I said, have not just given the money, but also really been very actively involved in all the sessions. It's been absolutely fantastic. A huge thank you to the team, to Visica, to Safa, to Hazel for running the programme, which has been amazing. We can't say any more, but do kind of watch this space for what might come next, and I can't say any more than that. But in terms of future of London, we've got some really interesting events coming up, so I just want to flag those up. Safa's just about to put the events link in the chat now, but we've got If you're working in the kind of health space, so built environment and health space, we've got a Navigating Health and Overcoming Barriers seminar on the 4th of November. On the 11th, we've got our big conference in London Bridge, which is all about building recovery with a focus on inequalities. Very welcome to come along to that. And then we've also, as a spin-off to the Council-led Housing Forum, running a 2-day intensive development management training course, which Danny's running for us, Danny Kay that is, and that's on the 18th and 19th of November. All the places have gone, but if you sign up to the waiting list, we're looking at running that again, and that has been incredibly popular. It's for people who are sort of at the beginning of their career in development management. So thank you very much to everyone for participating in that. Thanks to everyone for getting involved in the forum. It's been an amazing 3 years. I can't believe it's gone so quickly. Hope to see you at future of London events, and we'll keep you posted on what might follow from this particular forum. Take care everyone and have a lovely day.
Thank you.